Good evening, and welcome to our discussion. Tonight we delve into a profoundly challenging and sensitive question. Is it ethical to deny life-saving medical treatment based on cost? This issue touches upon our deepest values concerning human life, justice, and the responsibilities of our healthcare systems. Joining me to explore this complex topic are two distinguished guests. First, we have Mr. Samuel Green, a fervent advocate for patient rights, who believes that healthcare is a fundamental human right, irrespective of cost. And second, Ms. Olivia Thorne, a healthcare policy analyst, who will argue that while difficult, considering cost is a necessary aspect of managing finite healthcare resources responsibly. We anticipate a thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. It's a privilege to be here to discuss such a critical matter. My position is unequivocal. Access to life-saving medical treatment is a fundamental human right. It should never be conditional on a patient's ability to pay or the perceived cost-effectiveness of their life. To deny someone essential medical care because they cannot afford it, or because the treatment is deemed too expensive by a committee, is, in my view, inherently discriminatory. It sends a chilling message that some lives are worth less than others. This practice undermines the very ethical foundations of medicine, which are built on compassion, healing, and the Hippocratic oath to do no harm. How can we reconcile this with turning away patients in their most desperate hour due to financial constraints? Furthermore, such denials have a devastating societal impact. They exacerbate existing socioeconomic disparities, creating a two-tiered system where the wealthy receive care and the poor are left to suffer or die. This erodes public trust in our healthcare institutions and, indeed, in the fairness of our society. The moral compass of any society is best judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members. Therefore, healthcare systems must prioritize the preservation of life above purely economic calculations.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. I also appreciate the opportunity to engage in this important conversation. I want to begin by acknowledging the profound, emotional, and ethical complexity of this issue. No one wishes to be in a position where life-saving treatment is withheld due to cost. The human element is undeniably powerful. However, we must also confront an unavoidable reality. Healthcare resources, including financial capital, skilled professionals, and advanced technologies, are finite. They are not limitless. Because these resources are limited, difficult choices about their allocation are, unfortunately, an inevitable part of managing any healthcare system, whether it's publicly or privately funded. This brings us to the economic principle of opportunity cost. Every significant expenditure on one extremely expensive treatment for a single individual means those funds cannot be used for other essential health services. These foregone opportunities might include primary care for hundreds, vaccinations for thousands, or mental health services for a whole community. Healthcare systems have a solemn responsibility to remain sustainable to serve the entire population effectively, not just in the present, but for future generations as well. This requires careful stewardship of the resources we have.
Thank you both for your compelling opening statements. You've clearly delineated the core tension we're exploring tonight. Mr. Green, while the ethical ideal of universal access to care is indeed compelling, and one many would share, how do you propose healthcare systems realistically manage their finite budgets if cost is entirely disregarded as a factor, particularly when faced with exceptionally expensive new treatments for rare conditions?
That's a fair question, Dr. Hayes, and it's one that proponents of cost-based rationing often raise. My response is that we need to address the systemic issues that create these perceived scarcities in the first place. Firstly, I advocate for substantial and sustained increases in public investment in health. A healthy population is a productive population, and healthcare should be viewed as an investment, not just an expense. Secondly, we must implement robust negotiations for pharmaceutical prices. It is unacceptable that drug manufacturers can charge exorbitant prices for life-saving medications, often developed with significant public funding. We need to challenge this status quo. Thirdly, there are significant administrative inefficiencies within healthcare systems that consume vast resources without directly benefiting patients. Streamlining these processes could free up considerable funds. And finally, a greater emphasis on preventative care and public health initiatives can significantly reduce the incidence of diseases that require high-cost interventions later on. Prevention is not only better than cure, it is often far more cost-effective. The finite resources argument, while superficially pragmatic, can sometimes serve as a convenient excuse to avoid implementing equitable funding models, or to shy away from confronting the vested interests that profit from inflated healthcare costs. True sustainability, in my view, must encompass social equity and the intrinsic, non-negotiable value of every human life. Economic arguments should not be permitted to supersede our fundamental ethical duties to care for one another.
Mr. Green raises several important points regarding systemic reform, and I agree that many of those initiatives, such as negotiating drug prices and investing in preventative care, are crucial and long overdue. However, these are often complex, long-term endeavors. They require political will, significant restructuring, and time to yield results. They do not, unfortunately, resolve the immediate, difficult resource allocation dilemmas that healthcare providers and policymakers face every single day. Consider a practical scenario. A hospital has a limited budget for its intensive care unit. A new drug becomes available that costs, say, £500,000 per patient per year, and offers a small chance of extending life by a few months for a rare, aggressive cancer. Treating just 2 or 3 patients with this drug could consume a substantial portion of the ICU's budget. This might mean fewer nurses, older equipment, or an inability to fund other established, highly effective treatments that could benefit dozens of other patients with different critical conditions. Patients with a high probability of returning to a good quality of life. In such situations, decision-makers must weigh the potential benefit to one or a few against the potential benefits to many. This is where tools like health technology assessments, HTAs, and cost-effectiveness analyses, such as those using quality-adjusted life years or QALYs, come into play. These tools are admittedly imperfect, and they can be controversial, but they attempt to provide a systematic way to evaluate the value derived from different healthcare interventions, aiming to maximize the overall health benefit for the population from the available resources. It's not about denial as a first resort, but about striving for the most equitable and impactful use of shared funds.
Your points highlight the very real trade-offs involved. Ms. Thorne, you've mentioned tools for decision-making. But a significant concern often voiced is that any system incorporating cost considerations could disproportionately disadvantage already vulnerable individuals, the poor, the elderly, or those with chronic conditions. How can a system that explicitly includes cost in its decision-making framework ensure equity and avoid creating or worsening a two-tiered system where access to the best care is determined by wealth or social standing?
That is an absolutely critical and valid concern, Dr. Hayes, and one that must be proactively and robustly addressed in any discussion of resource allocation. If cost considerations are to be part of the equation, it cannot be done in an arbitrary or discriminatory manner. I strongly advocate for the development of transparent, ethically grounded frameworks and clear, publicly debated guidelines for making such difficult decisions. These frameworks must be developed with input from ethicists, clinicians, patient representatives, and the wider community. The criteria used must be explicit, consistently applied, and open to scrutiny and appeal. Furthermore, even within a system that is cost-aware, specific mitigation strategies must be implemented to protect vulnerable patients. This could include establishing safety nets, such as hardship funds, or special access programs for those who cannot afford necessary co-payments or treatments not routinely funded. There should also be robust appeals processes that allow patients and their advocates to challenge decisions they believe are unfair or incorrect. Additionally, Dedicated funds could be set aside specifically for rare diseases or exceptionally costly treatments, where standard cost-effectiveness thresholds might not be appropriate, acknowledging the unique circumstances involved. It's also crucial to differentiate between withholding all care, which is ethically indefensible, and making carefully considered choices regarding specific, extremely high-cost interventions that may offer only marginal benefits or have a very low probability of success. The goal must always be to ensure that comprehensive, basic, and effective care remains universally accessible, even if limits are placed on the most expensive, cutting-edge treatments with limited overall population benefit.
Ms. Thorne, while the idea of transparent guidelines and mitigation strategies sounds reasonable in principle, if the foundational principle of the system allows cost to ultimately veto a life-saving intervention, the fundamental ethical problem, from my perspective, persists. No amount of procedural fairness can truly compensate for a decision that effectively says, your life is too expensive to save. Safety nets and appeal processes might soften the blow, but they don't change the underlying calculus if that calculus prioritizes money over a human life. Furthermore, you mentioned marginal benefit. Who defines marginal benefit, and from what perspective? For a clinician looking at statistical outcomes across a population, a few extra months of life with poor quality might seem marginal. But for the patient facing a life-threatening condition, and for their family, that extra time, however compromised, might be invaluable. A chance to say goodbye, to reach a milestone, to experience a little more of life. The subjectivity of benefit is a profound challenge here. We also need to consider the potential long-term impact on medical innovation. If pharmaceutical companies and researchers know that high-cost, life-saving treatments, even if they are breakthroughs, are likely to be routinely unfunded due to their price, it could disincentivize research and development in critical areas, particularly for rare diseases where the market is small but the need is great. Finally, I must voice my concern about the slippery slope. Once we accept that cost can be a legitimate reason to deny life-saving care, where do we draw the line? The criteria for denial could gradually expand. The thresholds for, quote, cost-effectiveness could be lowered, and we could find ourselves progressively eroding access to care that we currently take for granted. It's a dangerous precedent to set.
We are approaching the end of our allocated time for this vital discussion. The arguments from both sides have been incredibly insightful and have illuminated the complexities we face. I would now like to invite each of you to provide a brief closing statement to summarize your main position on this matter.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. In closing, I want to reiterate a core ethical principle that I believe must guide us. A society's moral standing, its very humanity, is most clearly reflected in its unwavering commitment to protecting its most vulnerable members, especially when their lives are at stake. The idea that a person's worth can be quantified in monetary terms, or that their chance to live can be weighed against a budget line, is an affront to human dignity. We must strive to build and maintain a healthcare system that is founded upon the principles of solidarity, compassion, and the non-negotiable intrinsic value of every individual life. While I acknowledge the economic challenges, these should spur us to find more innovative and equitable ways to fund and deliver care, not to create rationing systems that abandon people in their time of greatest need. My final appeal is simple. Let us not allow economic considerations to become the ultimate arbiter in decisions of life and death. We must choose humanity over hisabat, calculations.
Thank you. As we conclude, I want to restate that decisions involving cost and life-saving medical treatments are profoundly challenging, and they carry an immense ethical weight. There are no easy answers, and no one approaches this lightly. While the ideal of providing every conceivable treatment to every individual is a noble one, we must also acknowledge our collective responsibility as stewards of communal healthcare resources. This stewardship is, in itself, an ethical obligation. It means working to ensure that our healthcare system can provide the greatest possible health benefit to the entire population, sustainably and equitably, both now and for future generations as well. This sometimes requires making difficult choices about how to allocate limited funds to achieve the broadest positive impact. The path forward, I believe, lies not in ignoring costs, nor in callously denying care, but in fostering an ongoing, nuanced, and transparent societal dialogue. We must collectively navigate the delicate balance between individual needs, the realities of available resources, and our shared ethical commitments to fairness and the well-being of all.
Mr. Green, Ms. Thorne, thank you both for your insightful and articulate contributions to what is, undeniably, a very difficult and often emotionally charged discussion. You have both presented your perspectives with clarity and conviction. Tonight, we've explored the profound ethical imperative to preserve life and alleviate suffering, juxtaposed against the pragmatic and unavoidable challenges posed by finite healthcare resources and the consequent need for equitable allocation. Mr. Green has passionately argued for the sanctity of life and the moral obligation to provide care regardless of cost, emphasizing systemic reforms to make this achievable. Ms. Thorne has countered with the complexities of resource management, advocating for transparent frameworks to make necessary, albeit difficult, choices to ensure the sustainability and overall benefit of the healthcare system for the entire community. There are clearly no simple solutions, and the questions raised tonight will continue to demand our attention as medical advancements bring new, often costly, treatments, and as societies grapple with how to fund them. We encourage our audience to continue reflecting on these complex issues, to engage in informed debate, and to consider the profound societal implications of the choices we make in this critical domain. Thank you for joining us. Good evening.